G'day. Alright, today I'm going to read a little passage out of a book. Or yes, a book. Those are those things with pages for those who grew up with the internet. Peter Andrews is the guy, an Australian bloke, absolute champion. This is his second book, Beyond the Brink. If you don't know who Peter is, I'd suggest checking him out, especially if you're into environmentalism, or you're a farmer, or you're just curious on how to fix the world. Being Australia's where we are, and where Pete's from, we'll start with there. So the passage I'm going to read out is to do with the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. There are certain similarities between the Hunter Valley and the Burnett River catchment area, I suppose we'll call it. Today we don't see what Australia did look like. So anyways, let me carry on. So this is chapter 26, Close to Home. Sorry about the traffic, it will go away in a second. Noisy bastards. Sorry about that. Anyway, when I look around Australia today, I do not see a rosy picture. Western Australia is in a desperate state. Queensland and South Australia, in places, are heading in the same direction. Parts of Tasmania are bad, and, of course, we all know about Victoria. This book was written before the current state of Victoria. Then we come to New South Wales, in particular to the Hunter Valley, which for me is close to home. The Hunter is the area I know best, where I have spent the past 30 years of my life. It was one of the first areas in Australia to be settled by farmers and grazed intensively. It was also a kind of staging area for sheep and cattle brought in from the interior, especially during droughts. Okay, so west of the mountains things would get a bit rough, and basically they'd bring the sheep and the cattle in towards the coast a bit more, where there was food and water for the animals. So the area came under immense strain, and it collapsed under the strain quite early, in the early 1900s, as best as I can tell from the records. The over-exploitation of the land, especially in the catchments, meant that whenever it rained heavily, the runoff into the Hunter River was much faster and harder, since the vegetation was no longer there to slow it down. As a result, the next few floods tore just about every tree out of the whole flow line of the Hunter River. I don't think I've actually been to the Hunter River, but it sounds a lot like the Burnett. There was some unfortunate human intervention too. The Hunter Valley used to be a floodplain, same as the Burnett River, which meant that it, in the natural order of things, for it to be flooded periodically, same as here. When white settlers first moved into the district, they set about trying to prevent the river flooding in their own areas by building levees and digging drains, all of which had the effect of concentrating the flow and exacerbating the problems that the flood caused. We have the same issues here. The Hunter River itself came under strain too. We know from records that when white settlers first arrived, the river was a deep but narrow channel. Sorry about that. Perhaps only 30 metres wide and 4 or 5 metres deep. Then it was part of an efficiently functioning floodplain system. Like all Australian rivers, the Hunter was elevated above the surrounding floodplain for about 70% in its length. In places it was as much as 7 metres higher than the land around it. The river had a series of wetlands along its length, where it would descend to the level of the floodplain. Water would spread out there, later converging back into a single flow line. So, come down, spread out, soak up the ground, and concentrate down to the next patch. The Hunter also had a number of meanders, by which I mean loops in the river where the river turned back on itself. In places, the Hunter River used to turn back almost 180 degrees before wandering away again. Many of those meanders have disappeared. For instance, the river between Morpeth, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Morpethians, and Singleton used to have a length of 27 kilometres. Today the length is just 9 kilometres. So basically it's 1/3 of its length. A lot of the windy things that take the energy out of the water are gone, so it's a straight run, which helps gouge things out. The meandering river necessarily moved more slowly, and it was better able to inundate the land around it during a flood. If you take out the meanders, the river will automatically run faster and more erosively. If you also take out the wetlands, you end up with a big drainage channel, which is what the Hunter is today. I would also say the Burnett River is exactly the same sort of thing. The wetlands are gone, it's just one massive incision through the countryside, and it just pumps. Like when there's a flood or a lot of rain, the river's just choked with shit. It's disgusting. Its water no longer spreads and saturates the soil right across the floodplain. Instead, it is concentrated into a single flow. Hence, the river is 300 metres wide today and perhaps 20 metres deep, same as the Burnett. This is a transformation, not a change. Okay, there's a bit of a difference there. What has happened to the Hunter is symptomatic of the problems that afflict our rivers generally. They now run through the lowest part of the landscape in channels carved out by erosion. Today, instead of taking both surface water and in-ground water away from the river, gravity takes surface water and in-ground water to the river. So instead of spreading out the water, soaking it up into the land as it used to do, it now just pisses off out into the ocean. Okay, so it's just making the problem worse. Australia and its dry situation. Whereas plant residues used to be processed outside the river in the wetlands, they are now concentrated in the river. The result, the concentration of this residue in the river increases steadily the further down the river you go, which means of course that plants downstream are having to grow in the concentrated residue of plants of the same species. No plant can do this and remain healthy. The solution is twofold. 1. We need more biodiversity along the river, especially among the gum trees. Most of our river catchments are dominated by gum trees, so we have eucalypt residues going right down the flow line. And in case you didn't know, gum trees secrete a toxin which inhibits the growth of other plants. Okay, so you've got all these gum trees up in the catchments, they pump all this poison into the water and it rushes on down the river and basically munts everything downstream from it. The solution is twofold. 1, we need more biodiversity. We need to have plants growing among the gums that break down the gum's allelopathic compounds. The allelopathic compounds are the poisons. There are a number of plants that are guaranteed to do the job, reeds being one. Privet would do the job too. I have used it with success myself. Wherever you see privet growing among gum trees, you will find that the gum trees are healthy. No dead wood, no mistletoe. Yet our weed authorities are ripping them out as fast as they can go. So that's another example of the government basically actively working against the best interests of the country. Okay, so biodiversity is excellent, but the government, they're not really for biodiversity, land care, all these other environmental groups. They say biodiversity is really good, but on the other hand, they poison and rip out and get rid of anything that they deem not important. So if land care and the other environmental groups would just stop doing what they're doing, things would improve extremely quickly. Okay, that goes for councils and state governments and all the rest of it. Okay, lantana. Okay, that's something we should all be familiar with here in Queensland. Lantana. People hate it. I think it's pretty cool. But anyway, I digress. Lantana and camphor laurel trees might also be worth trying. I suspect these plants can live in the mulch of the gum trees and turn up good soil. In other words, they can break down the allelopathic compounds produced by the gum trees. Now, I am well aware that privet, lantana and camphor laurel trees have all been declared noxious weeds in various parts of Australia, a fact which encourages me to think that they probably have a lot to offer. Peter is a bit of a anti-authoritarian sort of guy in his outlook in certain things, but he's right all the time. He's put these things to practice and they work. I suggest lantana in particular because even people who view it as a dangerous weed agree that you always find good soil under a lantana. So why not recognize that it promotes good soil and make use of it? Why not use it as a mulch plant? One that you can chop up with a mulching machine and spread around the property. You could do the same thing with privet, chop it up and mulch when you need it. As you're out driving around, cruising around, doing whatever you do, if you do have a look in the bush, take note. Lantana grows excellent around gum trees. It's one of the few things out there that does grow really thick and seems to handle gum tree poison really well. In time it will help to take out the gum trees, which is a positive aspect. So it nourishes the dirt, builds soil, gets rid of gum trees, can handle living around gum trees. So it's an all-round good guy, basically. There will be a lot of people who will say, yeah, you're full of shit, I hate it, but that's cool. Alright, the proof is there. Lantana generally grows in very deteriorated soils, along mountains, hills, all that sort of stuff, where the undergrowth has been flogged out, burnt, and dominated by gum trees. There's one Queensland guy who operates a business, a lantana removal business, and his life goal is basically to wipe out lantana and make a quid doing it. And it's kind of funny when you watch his videos because he'll show a picture of the bush along the highway somewhere and be having a big spaz out about all the lantana, and it's really doing a good job. But the guy's perspective of the plant is that it's purely negative and kills koalas and all sorts of rubbish. But anyway, camphor laurels are detested by environmentalists. I saw a reference to them recently and it had a skull and crossbones symbol next to the text, suggesting that camphor laurels are poisonous. All I know is that whenever I've seen them growing among gums, the landscape has looked unusually healthy. So I mean, the proof's there. You just have to open your eyes and have a look and go, it's pretty simple stuff. Okay. A lot of preconceived ideas, things you get taught in government schools, things like that. They tend to be wrong anyway. So do yourself a favour and get out of schools, readjust your mental outlook on things. So introducing biodiversity is one half of the twofold solution I referred to before, which is fixing the Hunter Valley. The other half is re-establishing wetland functions at intervals along our rivers. Re-establishing the wetlands themselves may be impossible, but we can certainly duplicate the functions that the wetlands once performed. My own proposal for the Murray River, we've all heard of the Murray. Oh, that's another government fucking mess too, by the way. That's fun. So his proposal for the Murray River is a series of dairy complexes along the river, each of which would function as a wetland, But the wetlands we create do not have to be based on dairies. There is any number of agricultural enterprises that could provide a commercial basis for a wetland scheme. Along the river Danube in Europe, if you've never heard of the Danube River, it's fucking huge, alright? Get a map, check it out. It'll be the huge big squiggly line running. Yeah, check it out. So along the Danube, for instance, the Australian common reed, Phragmites australis, has been grown as a wetland plant, but is also harvested as cattle food and as straw for thatching. So it's a multi-use plant. It's very handy. Go Australia, alright? One vital yet generally overlooked function that the old wetlands performed was to remove all the floating debris that come down the river. When a big volume of water comes down the river after heavy rain, it can carry a vast mass of floating debris, not only tree branches and the like, but whole trees. Today this is all swept along until it reaches the sea. Newcastle Harbour, or Newcastle, potato, it's Newcastle. Always going to be Newcastle. Newcastle Harbour, for instance, is liable to be swamped with floating debris if ever a lot of rain fell in the Hunter catchment. If enough debris came down and there is nothing in the river now to stop it, it could close down the harbour for a week or more, which obviously would have serious financial consequences. The Burnett River's exactly the same. You get a lot of tree branches. You do get the odd tree float down as well. Water hyacinth, a lot of that stuff comes down. After the big floods, there was crap everywhere. Took a long time to tidy all that stuff up. A lot of it would have been better left in place and allowed to mulch back down, but government. Alright. It would not be hard to design a wetland that could cope with floating debris on this scale. After all, we are talking about a wetland extending over thousands of acres. Any wetland you installed on the Hunter River, for instance, would probably need to be 10,000 acres in area. Sounds like a lot, but Australia's fucking huge. According to models I have worked on, only 500 acres of this, or 5% of the total, would be contaminated by floating debris in the event of a big flood. With modern machinery, it would not be hard to clear up an area of this size afterwards. In any case, the debris would all mulch down eventually and add to productivity and profitability. Farmers, landowners, take note. Okay, all the stuff that you catch when there's a big lot of rain, it all will break down, improve your block of land, and improve your neighbours downstream from there as well. So if you can catch that stuff, keep it on your property, you'll notice that things will get better pretty darn quick. Moreover, the sand that the wetland trapped could be concentrated at certain points, and it too would become a resource. People tend to think of wetlands as areas that may be nice for water birds and other wildlife but are otherwise wasted space. The truth is, a wetland has the potential to be the most productive part of the whole river system. Potentially, our Australian landscape is terribly erosive, yet the ancient pristine landscape was a marvel of self-sustainability before we came along. And the Aboriginals, of course. Yeah, we're both bastards, black and white. It had big, beautiful inland floodplains and streams that were neither eroded nor clogged with sediment. Their channels were deep and free of erosion, and more than one explorer noted Australia's rivers consisted of deep channels linking chains of wetlands. Any erosive energy generated by water flowing in the channels will be dissipated in the next wetland. It was the ultimate in landscape management. Thanks, Pete. You're a top bloke. So yeah, I mean, you could probably go anywhere in Australia and find the same sort of issues. The Fitzroy, Burdekin, Burnett, Mary, that's just Queensland. I mean, you know, there's heaps out there. But look around, figure it out, and you know, if anyone's saying pull this plant out, get rid of that, poison this, get rid of that, just don't listen to them. All right, poisons, they're bad. All right, I for a long time, well, most of my life, resisted poisons. I never liked the smell. I didn't like the idea of spraying toxic chemicals all around the place. It just never sat right with me. And then, probably 4 or 5 years ago, my dad brought over a whole bunch of poison for me one day, just because he's a good man. So I started using the poison around the yard, spraying weeds and along fence lines and all that sort of thing. And the curious thing that I found was the poison made things worse. So, you'd spray it on the fence line, get rid of a few different things, and they'd come back. And they'd come back more. And they'd come back more. And it didn't matter how many times I poisoned it, it would always come back. Since I've found Peter and digested the absolute hell out of a lot of his information, I've realised why. So I gave up on using poisons, and I will never use poisons again, because they are a waste of time and money. They're counterproductive. So farmers out there, take note. Stop spraying poisons, let the weeds grow. Alright, that sounds pretty bizarre, but I will make another video explaining a little bit more from Peter's book. He speaks in a way that is very easy to understand. A lot of things might be counter to what you already believe, but he's right. He's a top bloke. So if you haven't read his books, there's Back from the Brink, which is a really quick and easy read. If you're a reader. If you're not a reader, you can still read it. Maybe pop it in the dunny, or put it beside the bed, or have your cuppa in the morning and knock out a quick chapter. They're only short. Beyond the Brink is his second book. It just elaborates a little bit more on topics that he touched on in his first book. There's plenty of videos on YouTube. I've got a playlist with a whole bunch of his stuff. Well worth looking at. But anyway, have a beautiful day, and remember, taxation is theft. Alright, see ya.